You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hi, I'm Annie in the USA.
And I'm Johanna in Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your ongoing support, your downloads, your reviews, and of course your lovely messages. Also, shout out to our newest Patreon members, and they are Laura and Sarah H. Also, quick note. If you're a Patreon member, make sure that your notifications are on or that you check regularly, because I think people keep telling us that they keep missing things we post or they keep missing game night for our murder tears, stuff like that. If you turn on your notification, Patreon will tell you every time we post something there, right?
And we don't post a lot. Like if you turn on your notifications, you are not going to be getting 20 messages a day. You'll get a message when we've posted new content, pretty much.
Exactly. Another thing before we start, it's this time of the year again. We are heading into October soon. And you know what that means? It's a whole month of spooky fuckery coming up, ending with the traditional Halloween listener stories episode.
It's going to be awesome. You really put the uckery in that fuckery. It was good.
If you have any personal stories about the paranormal or some mysterious things happening in your life, please write it all up and send it to us via email, which is freshhellpodcast@gmail.com. I know we already got some messages and we have still some left from last year. I hope I didn't by accident delete any of it. If you have the feeling, I want to make sure I'm going to send it again, please feel free to send it again. We would so appreciate it.
Yeah, if you're ever on the fence whether you should send us something again, just go ahead and send it again.
Also, if when you write to us, please tell us if you want to be named or what name you would like to use, or maybe you want to stay anonymous. It's all fine. Just let us know.
Yeah. No, it's going to be good. I can't wait to read some new stories.
It's my favorite time of the year, and the listener stories always make us laugh and cry, and they're so good. I can't wait.
Yeah.
All right, I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of the story, so I'd say we jump right in.
I know, I'm excited too. The primary sources for this week, I should mention real quick, are there's a book, Suffered the Children by Troy Taylor. Also, the websites Murder by Gaslight and the Jamaica Plain Historical Society. There's also a ton of newspaper articles, which we'll cite as we go, and more in our sources if you want further reading. Also, just a content warning. This is part 2 of the 2-part we started last week, and we are going to be discussing all manner of crimes against children, and it's bad. So, I wrote up a recap for last week's episode. Do you want to read it, Johanna? Because
sure.
Then they're going to get sick of my voice. They'll miss you.
All right, so if you need a little refresher from last week's episode, here's the quick recap. In 1850, in Derry, New Hampshire, the 5-year-old daughter of Stephen Mills is kidnapped from her home and never seen again. 12 years later, and approximately 170 miles or 270 kilometers north, 9-year-old Laura Libby sets off from her family farm in Strong, Maine, for a day of Sunday school and church services at the Methodist Church, which is about 1.5 miles from her home. She never arrives, and her body is found in a shallow grave the next day. She has been murdered, her throat was cut, which caused her death, and she had head injuries from a rock. She was also raped, probably post-mortem. Laurence Doyle, a man from the Canadian provinces who lived and worked on the farm, was arrested on circumstantial evidence. He was tried twice and was the first person in U.S. history to take the stand in his own defense. He was sentenced to life in prison where he died, probably of tuberculosis, and he kept proclaiming his innocence. 3 years after Laura Libby is murdered and about 200 miles south, the siblings Isabella and John Joyce are visiting with their grandmother in the South End while their mother is away making dresses. It's Monday, 12th of June, 1865, and it's a beautiful warm day. The kids convince their grandmother they'll be able to visit some local woods and still get back in time for 11-year-old Johnny's afternoon school session. 14-year-old Bella is given a dime for the streetcar and the two set off, happy to spend some time together in the local woods about 2.5 kilometers or 1.5 miles from their grandmother's home. They are never seen alive again. Their mother, Isabel, having lost her father some years earlier, had returned to learn her children were missing, and local searches of the area where the children were supposed to have gone were fruitless. Finally, 5 to 8 days after they went missing, depending on what sources you read, hikers in Buzz's Woods in Jamaica Plain made a gruesome discovery when they happened upon a body. The police were notified and they were able to identify the body from the clothing as being, of course, Bella.
And that's where we left off. So once they made that identification, and they did make it by her clothing, they raised the alarm that her younger brother Johnny is still missing, of course, and it's only a matter of hours before the body of her brother is discovered. It's really sad because there were large search parties of police and other grown men, but some kids had joined in the search, and it was actually 2 young boys who found him. So that's extra sad. And now we need to discuss I was going to say evidence, but it's not like there was much by way of forensics happening at this time, so let's just talk about the scene. So any possible footsteps were lost because of the many people who had been searching, but we can reconstruct what happened with a pretty good degree of confidence given what was found. There were these little hills made from moss that they had collected and sort of artfully arranged into little piles. There were several wreaths made from leaves and evergreen boughs and wildflowers, including one that was circling Bella's hat. Now, this is all part of the theory that they were interrupted by the killer. So it seems what might have happened is they're making their wreaths, they're playing quietly together in the woods, and they're attacked. And it seems like maybe Johnny was frozen for a minute while his sister was fighting off her attacker, just paralyzed by shock. And then he turned and ran, and the killer ran after him, and the way he was found on his stomach indicated that he may have either tripped over a tree root and fallen, and then the killer stabbed him in the back, or the killer, sort of tackled him from behind and stabbed him.
No one reported any screams or anything? Like, were there other people around nearby?
No. Yeah, nobody reported hearing anything. There were lots of people around. Part of the problem is there were houses that were pretty close, but the woods were such a popular destination that screams would have been mistaken for children playing. I think we've talked about this before, like how frustrating it is sometimes when you hear a kid screaming, and it's like, what kind of scream is that? Like, do we need to call the police, or did somebody just see a bug? Also, the kids weren't found anywhere near where they said they'd be, so the people who lived around Mays Woods, which is where they said that they were going, they might have thought back and wondered had they heard anything, but the children were found in Buzz's Woods, and so at the time they wouldn't have had to think back, you know what I mean? I think there probably was screaming, unfortunately, because Isabella put up a hell of a fight. All right, this bit here is really bad, but we need to talk about what happened to these kids. So the killer had a very, very long, sharp knife. Isabella's hands were a mess, an absolute mess, and I think really a testimony to her bravery. She was missing the index finger of her right hand, and the rest of her fingers were really in rough shape, barely attached. Her palms were sliced to the bone. She had clearly grabbed onto that huge knife and just held on for as long as she could. But unfortunately, she wasn't strong enough. Isabella had 27 stab wounds in her torso and another 16 stab wounds in her neck. Possibly the worst detail was the moss and leaves found in her mouth. That really was upsetting to me, probably to keep her from screaming. Her body had then been moved to a more concealed spot. I think there was just like a large boulder, large rock, and she was sort of tucked under the base of it. John was found about 1/4 mile away near Bussy Brook. He had been stabbed repeatedly in the back, and further evidence to the size of the blade that was used was the fact that in John's case, several of the stab wounds went through his back, completely through his body and into the ground below. I think that that's the degree of overkill in this situation is something. And I've got some really good photos of the very, very beautiful places where these children died, because it really is a beautiful area. It's so sad.
As you say, it's an absolute overkill, and I have to wonder how the murderer attacked. Like, he attacked Isabella first, stabbed her once or several times real quickly, and then ran after Johnny, stabbing him, and then returning to Isabella because he did a lot to that girl. It's unbelievable. Because if he did it like attacked Bella first, did everything he had done to her, and then ran after Johnny, that must have been an insane frenzy. Like, he must have been so quick, and I don't think that's quite possible, right?
Right.
I think Johnny would have run way too far or too fast, or maybe, I don't know.
I think Johnny was probably, during the part where she grabbed hold of the knife, I would imagine that he was sort of just paralyzed watching that struggle go on for God knows how long it went on for, but it must have been a little while because of how much damage was done to her hands, right? She didn't hang on for a split second. There was a real battle over that knife. So I would guess he kind of watched up till that point, probably until she was stabbed maybe the first time, and then turned and ran, is how I would maybe imagine it.
Yeah, I think so too. And then the killer ran after him and then returned because, I mean, he also carried, I don't know, pulled her to another location, right? More concealed location.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think.
So once they knew that the kids went to these other woods, right? Not where they thought they would be. Were there any leads or witnesses then?
Yeah, so there was a witness and also kind of a puzzle. A woman came forward and said that on the day of the murders, she had seen a man who she thought was very scary looking. He had long, wild, crazy hair, and she thought he was creepy and possibly murdery, and she told the police that, what she had seen. The other thing to talk about is why did they end up going to Bussey's Woods? Because they were supposed to be going to May's Woods, which was apparently 1.5 miles from their grandmother's house, but how the heck did they decide to go all the way to the Arboretum? I'm going to read you what Troy Taylor writes in his book called Suffer the Children, because my sense of direction is awful, and if I try to explain this, I'm just going to read this for you. Quote, "How the pair ended up at Bussey's Woods, where their bodies were later discovered, remains a mystery to this day. Bussey's Woods was about 4 miles away. The police later theorized they had missed their streetcar stop and ended up at the end of the line. But what streetcar? The siblings had told their grandmother that they planned to walk. Had they changed their mind and decided to take a streetcar to ensure that John was back on time? Perhaps, but if so, how did they miss their stop? They were both well acquainted with the area, and it seems unlikely that they would make this kind of mistake. Getting to Bussey's Woods was not a simple matter of missing a stop. They had to take the Forest Hills car, the Dedham Turnpike route, all the way to the terminus. After that, they had to walk across the railroad, across the Jamaica Plain Road, over several hills, and out the road to the woods. It would have had to be their intention to go there in the first place, but why? Why pick such a distant spot when they had to be back so that John could return to school at 2 p.m.? We will never know, but we do know they ended up there somehow, and the decision to travel to Bussey's Woods turned out to be a fatal one." End quote. And it seems like they did take a car out there because some of the reports said that some coins were also found in the area near Isabella's body, which would have maybe been change from the dime that her grandma gave her.
Do you think it's possible that the murderer lured them there? That he met them at the station or in the streetcar and he kind of gained their trust and told them he's, I don't know, showing them something really cool out there. And they willingly went with him, and then, they were starting to play around a little bit or collect flowers, something like that, making the wreath. And then he attacked?
That's very possible. Very possible. The other thing I'm now wondering is, shout out to Jean in our Facebook group. She pulled up some really old maps of the area and found like May Street and the name May in Boston, much, much closer to the Arboretum where the children were found. So now I'm also wondering if the fact that May's Woods was 1.5 miles from Grandma's house is actually just wrong information. So maybe they were always taking the streetcar and someone on the car caught their eye. It's possible. Shout out to Jean. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that's definitely possible. I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much how the person who killed them came about them. It's just something else that makes you wonder, Okay, so I like this snippet from the New York Times, 20th of June, 1865, and it says, quote, "Arrest of the supposed murderer, large rewards offered, Boston, Monday, June 19th. Thomas Ainsley, a farmer, was arrested today on suspicion of complicity in the terrible murder of the Joyce children. As yet, however, no direct evidence appears against him. Rewards amounting to $5,500 have been offered by the authorities and individuals for the arrest of the criminals. The event creates a sensation of horror and a sadness throughout the whole community. Mrs. Joyce, the mother, on hearing the fate of her only children, swooned and is since reported to be a maniac." End quote. And is since reported to be a maniac. I want to laugh and cry because I think that's just so accurate to how
Definitely.
someone who had lost her husband and then both of her children, total fucking maniac. Yeah.
I mean, I think I know I've said that several times. If something happens to my sister or to my husband, I would lose my mind, right?
Yeah.
That's something people say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how it must feel.
Definitely. So there's some other stuff to discuss in there. First, of course, is the arrest of Thomas Ainsley. He was a neighbor. I think he actually lived in the same boarding house with Isabella and John. Remember, Isabella was living in Lynn with one of her aunts, and Isabella and John had moved into what I'm going to assume was a really small flat in a boarding house on Cottage Place in Boston. And Ainsley was a boarder, I think, who he hated them. He just harassed them. He threatened her. He threatened the kids. I think he was like a real get off of my lawn kind of asshole neighbor, but enough of one that people spoke up about having heard him threaten Isabel and the kids on several occasions. He was arrested on suspicion of the murder, and the problem was he had a rock-solid alibi and could prove it, so he was released. The next person who was arrested was a man by the name of John Stewart, and he was a real piece of work. So he was arrested because he was reported to have been seen at his aunt's home on June 12th, which is the day the kids went missing, with blood on him and a cut on one of his hands. This is from the New England Farmer, Boston, Massachusetts, July 15th, 1865. And this is just a small bit about Stewart from a larger article. Quote, "The prisoner Stewart is 22 years of age, 5 feet 5 inches in height, stout built, has a short, thick neck, full face, cold blue eyes, with very heavy eyebrows, but hardly has the appearance of being a wretch sufficiently hardened to be capable of committing the brutal crime with which he is charged. He is, however, an accomplished bounty jumper, acknowledging that he has deserted 9 separate times, re-enlisting under different names. He says he has been a very bad man, but is innocent of the murder of the Joyce children." End quote. So Stewart was a bounty jumper. So what that means is, remember, the Civil War is going on, and all the various armed forces were offering bounties, like a sign-on bonus, if you agreed to get out there with your musket. And so what he would do is he would enlist in the army, and then as soon as he got the bonus, he would desert and travel off to another area and then sign on with someone else. He fought for the United States. He fought against the United States. He didn't give a shit. He just wanted that bounty money. So word got back to police that maybe he had something to do with it, and amazingly, they tracked him down at Fort Independence, which is located on Castle Island in Boston Harbor. And that is where they found Stewart. He was able to prove, however, that he was nowhere near the area when the murders took place, and he was also cleared. Almost a year passed with no more leads. Then in the spring of 1866, we have another suspect. This is a career criminal who told his jailmates that he had killed the kids, and he also really liked to brag about raping women. So he was a real scumbag, and his cellmates told the warden, and the warden told the police what he had been saying. This is from the New York Times, Saturday, March 10th, 1866, Massachusetts. The Boston Herald has a long account of the discovery of the murderer of the 2 Joyce children, Isabella and John Joyce, in Bussey's Woods, West Roxbury, on the 12th of June, 1865. He was found to be a convict in the state prison who had been sent there for burglary committed in Worcester County shortly after the murder. His strange conduct when arrested led the officers to think he was a hardened criminal, and his subsequent boasting of large deeds performed by himself together with some of his unguarded expressions, gave the cue which, being followed by 2 Worcester County officers, has fastened the murder alluded to almost undeniably upon himself. His partial confessions, with the corroborative evidence obtained, leave no doubt in the minds of the officers of his guilt. His sobriquet is Scratch Gravel. His right name is Charles Aaron Dodge. He is a native of Massachusetts, but has been a rover for 14 years, being now 27 years of age. He confesses to having hunted Indians in Florida, that he was sent to prison for life for murder in South Carolina, was pardoned, entered into the rebel army, was captured on Morgan's raid into Ohio and Indiana, was paroled, that afterward he enlisted in a Massachusetts regiment, deserted in a short time, joined the United States Navy, and served on several gunboats. End quote. This fucking guy. So I learned sobriquet is French for nickname. I'm not sure why the newspaper had to use that on unsuspecting people, but here we are.
I wonder where Scratch Gravel came from. I want to know that.
I bet he gave himself that nickname just because he thought it sounded cool.
Does it?
Is it ever? So yeah, he's gross. He's a creep. They sent in a fake Confederate sympathizer to pretend to be a cellmate to try to loosen him up, like, hey, I'm just like you. Let's talk about stuff, and why don't you tell me about all the murders you've committed? And he did. He talked and talked and talked, but the problem was it was all talk. Wasn't the killer. He wasn't in Massachusetts when the killing happened, and he was their last lead. So some time passed. Well, in December of that same year, December 1866, they did find a skeleton in the Needham Woods. It's about 8 to 10 miles away, or I keep looking at Google Maps, but I do it directions if you were walking, because I'm just assuming everyone here just had to walk. So 3 hours walk from the present-day Arboretum, where the Joyce children's bodies were found, is where they found this skeleton. And the police were basically like, oh, you know what? This is for sure the killer of the Joyce children. He killed them, then came over here and hid out in the woods so that the police wouldn't find him. Mystery solved.
Sure, he was hiding and then forgot to eat. Died.
He just went to these other woods and he just lay down and died.
That's convenient.
And the papers were also, not amused. I'll post some of these articles in the Facebook group so that you can see them because it is kind of funny. But this one's the Fall River Daily Evening News, December 19, 1866, page 2. And it says, there's 2 snippets in this thing where it's let's see, by the stopping of the knitting mills at I can't pronounce that town. Well, Reverend Father Kenny of Dubuque, Iowa, has renounced the Catholic faith and will hereafter labor in the cause of Protestantism. Okay. There's just things like that. On Monday, whiskey valued at $60,000 coming from Richmond. It's just like a little, anyway, it's just little news snippets from around.
Yeah.
And it says, somebody starts the theory that the skeleton of the man found in the Needham Woods is that of the man who murdered the Joyce children at West Roxbury. Then there's a couple more pieces, and then it says again in the same article, a skeleton found in Needham, Mass. Is thought by some to be the remains of the murderer of the Joyce children in Roxbury. The foundation of the theory is not very apparent. I just like that one where it's even the newspaper's I don't think there's... So, after I found out about the first murder, Laura Libby, and all the different places, this is when I realized that there was an overlap in time period with the cases that we discussed in episodes 80 and 81. Because 2 years and 1 month after the murder of the Joyce children, so July 12th, 1867, Mrs. George Founty and her 16-year-old daughter Minnie are murdered in St. Alexandra, Canada. And horrifically, of course, this is terrible. Minnie is also raped and her genitals are mutilated. We discussed this in episode 80, so we're not going to spend any more time on that, but that's where you'll find the info. Our next crime takes place 5 years later in Northwood, New Hampshire, which is 65 miles or about 100 kilometers from Boston, and 200 miles or 333 kilometers from St. Alexandra. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. I went to their town website, which has a loon prominently featured, my favorite waterfowl. So I already like Northwood. And the website says, quote, The town of Northwood was founded in 1773 and is home to 4,241 year-round residents. Situated on Route 4, the town is on the main thoroughfare between Concord and Portsmouth and sees an average of 13,000 commuters every day. End quote. So Wikipedia adds, because they mention that turnpike, quote, around 1800, the Portsmouth to Concord Turnpike was built and the town began to prosper. Numerous taverns accommodated sledge and stage passengers. At one time, there were some 12 sawmills in the town, 5 of which were replaced by shoe factories during the latter half of the 19th century. By 1920, however, the last shoe factory had closed. More recently, the town has been a popular vacation spot, being home to 9 lakes and many antique shops, end quote. So that sounds like our kind of place. We like both lakes and antique shops, and it's not that far from me. So it's October 1872, and in 1870, the population of Northwood was about 1,400 people. And 13-year-old Georgianna Lovering lived on the family farm with her widowed mother, Susan, and her grandparents, which were her mother's parents, Sylvester and Deborah Day. We have a photo of Georgie that we'll share. She's beautiful. The New York Herald has a great description of her and her family, although this article says she was 14. Other ones say she was 13. It's splitting hairs. This is the New York Herald, November 5th, 1872, page 7. Quote, Miss Lovering, the unfortunate victim, was born in Northwood and was in the 14th year of her age.
Oh, but that means that she's 13. Like, for example, if you're married for 7 years, you're in your 8th year of marriage. So she's in her 14th year.
Oh.
She's 13 and in her 14th year of living. Like, I'm in my 44th year of living.
Oh, right. Oh, God. How did I not understand that that's what that meant until right now? I had no idea that that's what that meant. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I had no idea that being
it's
in
like
your
with
14th
the centuries.
year.
Like, 21st century, it's 2000.
Right. You've completed your 13th birthday,
exactly.
13th year. Now you're in your
in your 14th.
No, that makes perfect sense. I just don't know why I didn't understand it until just now. Okay, so it says, quote, Miss Lovering, the unfortunate victim, was born in Northwood and was in the 14th year of her age. Her father was a soldier in the 8th New Hampshire Regiment in the Rebellion War, returning home from service sick and dying soon afterwards. The family had been located at their present place 2 years. Their means are quite limited, consisting mainly of a government pension and the income from the mother's labor. Georgianna was the only child and was the idol of her mother, the pride of her grandparents, and the beloved companion of her cousin. She was a bright, pretty, and affectionate girl. Her form was well developed, her hair and eyes dark, and her countenance beamed with youthful life and buoyancy. She was, in truth, the sunlight of the household. Notwithstanding the slender income of the family, the mother took pride in dressing Georgie tastefully and in sending her to school. Her teachers bear ample testimony to her excellent scholarship. Outside her home, the girl was a favorite with the neighbors, and when she went to the village on domestic commissions, no young miss had more kind and pleasant salutations than Georgie Lovering. End quote. So she just sounds wonderful. In June of 1872, Deborah Day's brother, 64-year-old Franklin Evans, comes to stay with the family. So he is Susan's uncle and Georgie's great-uncle. Georgianna was called Georgie by her family, so I'm going to use that name from here. Frank Evans was horrible. He was a terrible person. If you've seen the show Shameless, have you watched Shameless?
Yeah.
The dad, Frank, like that, but worse, so much worse. He was a drifter and a con artist who had roamed about New England and Canada. He was always looking for a handout. He had no qualms defrauding people. He'd been married thrice, at least, that we know of, and had an adult child living in Derry, New Hampshire, and another living in Lawrence, Massachusetts. He had pretended to be a Seventh-day Adventist preacher for a time until, unfortunately, he was caught paying for sex. And, in the preaching trade, that's for the most part a no-no. And he was found out. He was the sort of family member, I think, that only shows up to your house when he needs something from you. He did make some respectable money by collecting and selling plants and herbs to real physicians, but that wasn't enough for him, so he also began to concoct his own bogus cures and sold them to desperate families, claiming he himself was a doctor and a botanist and a healer. I'm pretty sure he had some delusions of grandeur there. He fancied himself just a real authority on all of it. He had been caught trying to forge money. He was trying to turn $10 bills into $100 bills by, like, drawing on another zero. Mm-hmm. He had also committed insurance fraud. All right, get this. So it was with Travelers Company in Boston, the insurance company. They're still around. He took out a $1,500 life insurance policy on himself, and he had like an accomplice helping with all this. And then he went down to Hampton Beach in New Hampshire, which is a fabulous spot, and he took off all his clothes and like left them in the sand and pretended that he drowned.
Jesus.
Yeah.
It probably didn't work though, because otherwise we wouldn't know about it, right?
Yeah, I think the partner was the problem there, or Frank was. I don't think he was the sharpest of people. So, yeah, it's crazy. But wait, there's more. He was charged with numerous petty theft and burglary charges. And what does he do immediately after showing up on his sister's farm and being welcomed by the family? He makes a pass at his 13-year-old grandniece, Georgie. She not only tells him to fuck off, in, I'm sure, much more polite terms, but she also immediately goes to her mother and tells her mother what happened.
Good.
Right? Always go to your mother. Or any adult that you trust, if anybody tries anything with you ever. Frank is all apologies and excuses and promises it'll never happen again, and it was just a misunderstanding, and it doesn't happen again. And in their further defense, they also probably didn't know about any of the other stuff that he'd been involved with, his cons and his, So months pass, and he's been just absolutely perfect. He hasn't been improper with anybody, certainly not with his niece again. And now it's late October, and he's setting snares in order to try and catch some game birds like partridge in the woods to have for supper. The Day Farm was very close to thousands, like over 2,000 acres of woods. And so on October 21st, Franklin is gone all day, and when he gets back, that night at dinner, he's telling them about how he's been making snares in order to catch these birds, and Georgie is sort of interested in that. So the next day, he asks if she wants to come with him to check his snares and see if he has caught anything, and I have no idea why, but she agrees to go.
Look, if he was not inappropriate anymore with her and he was just on his best behavior and he was a relative and like a person of trust or kind of respect. He's an older relative.
And an elder. Exactly. Yeah.
And she was interested in that. I think it makes perfect sense that she would go with him.
It does. It absolutely does. It's just one of those in hindsight. Why?
Yeah. We wish she wouldn't. Yeah, of course.
So they go off into the woods, and he hasn't caught anything, but he does show her how the snares work, and she thinks it's pretty cool. So they go back home, and they don't have any birds. But a few days later, on October 25th, 1872, he tells everyone that he had agreed to work on a farm for the day. That's how he made money. He did farm work for whoever needed it. And so he tells Georgie that he's going to be away that day working on the hill farm. He tells everyone at breakfast. And he says to Georgie, hey, maybe you want to go check the traps for me because you know where they are. They're all hidden in bushes, and surely by now we must have caught something. And she's not super into it. He has to sort of convince her, but she does agree that she'll go and have a look. And so Frank leaves, and a little while later, Georgie gets a warm shawl, and she twists her thick dark hair up and fastens it out of her face with a hair comb. And she leaves the Day Farm, walking into the woods. When she is not home by lunchtime, her grandfather begins to worry, and so Sylvester goes into the woods to have a look around, but he is not seeing any sign of her, so he goes looking for his daughter Susan, and he tells her that he's worried that Georgie's not back, and she's immediately worried. And so the two of them set off at once to search the woods, and they follow paths, and they're pushing through thickets and yelling Georgie's name, and they do come across her shawl on a tree branch, and then nearby, they find her hair comb on the ground, snapped in half, with strands of her hair still wrapped around the combs. And they can see that the ground around the area looks disturbed, with boot prints and smaller shoe prints all around. And so now they're terrified, and they're screaming her name, and they just can't find anything. And it's getting dark. So they make way for home, and they stop on the way at every neighbor's house, banging on doors, letting them know that Georgie's missing, and keep an eye out. They notify the authorities, who immediately suspected Franklin Evans.
Obviously, he's a suspect, but why was he a suspect immediately to the authorities? Because of his past? Because they knew that?
And I'm guessing also the mother probably said immediately,
Mm-hmm.
I would have, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
So that's my guess. But they check out Frank's alibi, and Mr. Hill, the farmer he was supposed to be working for that day, he was like, I haven't seen Frank in like a week. He wasn't at my farm. So he's not a very good liar, is he?
He planned out everything so carefully. Like, he really... That might be sound so wrong, but he bit his time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he really gained her trust. He showed her the snares. And
yes.
And then something so stupid with that alibi.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like...
Thank God.
Yeah, well, obviously yeah. But it's crazy, isn't it? Like you said, because he first met her in June. So July, August, September. So 4 months. 4 months of perfect behavior in order to get to this point.
Setting everything up, in fact.
Awful. Another neighbor came forward and they said that they'd seen Frank walking into the woods at 8:30 that morning, which was a half hour before Georgie had. Taylor writes in his book that, quote, County Sheriff Henry Drew grilled Evans, but the old man could offer no convincing account of his whereabouts on the day that his grandniece went missing. He was promptly taken into custody. Inside Evans' pockets, Drew later stated, he found a wallet, money, obscene books, a bottle of liquor, and a common bone-handled knife with 2 blades, blood-stained and keen as a razor, end quote. So keen is another term for sharp.
Mm.
Those are some big fucking pockets.
I was wondering the same, but yeah.
Yeah.
I also think the obscene books was pretty small. Usually, I think it's what is kind of drawings or like... Yeah,
something you could...
Not like books that we imagine when we hear books.
No, it wasn't an issue
right?
of Playboy. Yeah. It was like a tiny pocket book that...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I bet they were popular in the war.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah. In any case, they knew he was a problem. He was questioned at length, but he just denied. And then the sheriff says, listen, no harm is going to come to you. We just have to know what happened to Georgie. And so he says, okay, fine. I kidnapped her because there's a farmer 20 miles away in Kingston, New Hampshire, who wants a wife, and he'll pay for a wife. And so he kidnapped her and he sold her to a farmer, and she was alive and well and wifing it up over in Kingston at the age of 13. And so off the sheriff went to Kingston, and he was able to really quickly determine that Frank was, you know, as previously suspected, a lying piece of shit, because obviously none of this was true. So the sheriff heads back to Northwood, and he confronts Evans about the lie, but he gets nowhere. Over the next several days, the sheriff tries everything he can think of to get Franklin to talk, including getting him drunk and ensuring him that he was his friend. He even told him that he would help him escape to Canada if he just told him the truth. Finally, 6 days after Georgie went missing, on October 31st, the sheriff says, quote, in the hearing of no persons but us two and the great being above, I ask you this question. Is the body of the girl cold in death? And Franklin responded, it is, Mr. Drew. I have done wrong. End quote. So Frank agrees to show Sheriff Drew where Georgie's body is, and they don't wait till morning. It's Halloween, it's almost midnight, and the sheriff and Evans, along with several deputies that are going to get roused up to come with them, they all set off for the woods. They're in the woods, it's dark, it's swampy, it's cold, it's boggy in places, it's really hard going. And then Frank's like, oh, oops, sorry, yeah, I'm lost, I don't know where we are, we need to start over again. So they were there for a long time. Finally, they're wet, bruised, covered in mud, scratched by brambles, maybe covered in ticks. I'd have fucking killed him before we managed to find the body, I think. But Sheriff Drew is a saint, so the pair reach an area and Frank indicates that this is where she is. But Sheriff Drew doesn't see what he's talking about, and so Frank goes and brushes away a few leaves, and there they see a flash of white. And it is the body of his niece, Georgie. Drew handcuffs Evans, who is being such a little bitch. He doesn't want to be handcuffed. He's crying, he's begging, he's screaming. And then once he finally gets the cuffs on him and he flings himself to the ground and he's like, please just shoot me. And the sheriff's like, I told you, you wouldn't be harmed. I really hope he said it exactly that way or with more snark because fuck this guy. So a deputy stays on the scene with Evans, and Drew slogs back out of the woods to go and fetch a surgeon. They brought Georgiana's body back on a litter through those woods. That must have been an absolute nightmare. And she was taken, I believe, to the town hall where her body was laid out for autopsy. And what was done to her was awful. Okay, this is bad. This is really bad. She had bruising around her neck, as well as other indications showing, like petechia and things showing clearly that she had been strangled to death. Once she was dead, Evans had raped her and then cut open her abdomen to remove her uterus. He also cut off her vulva, which was missing. Drew was able to convince Evans to show him where he had hidden the body parts, and those were buried under a rock not that far from where her body had been found. So there's no question that he did this.
Yeah.
From Troy Taylor's book again, quote, "When a stunned Sheriff Drew asked him why he had committed such butchery, the old man calmly replied that he did it, quote, to gain some knowledge of the human system that might be of use to me as a doctor," end quote. As he was dragging the man back to jail, Drew had one more question for him. "What did you set those snares for, Frank?" Evans answered with a self-satisfied smirk, "I set them to catch the girl, and I catched her." End quote. So, like you just said, talk about a long game, right?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we often talk about how crime scenes are, just how different they were back in the day. So this is a little piece about the people of Northwood coming to view the body. This is from the New York Herald, November 5th, 1872, page 7. This is a small piece from a much larger article. Quote, "Little did most of the people of Northwood realize as they rose in the morning what terrible scenes had been transpiring in their midst during the darkness of the night. They retired with the mystery apparently as unsolved as ever, and rose to learn that Evans had confessed the murder and disclosed the body, that it had been recovered from its dismal resting place and had been laid out in the hall in the village. As the news spread, the excitement was intense. Many could not believe it until they actually gazed upon the lifeless form. From every direction the people came crowding the hall to learn the particulars of the terrible tragedy. The news went to surrounding towns, and all through the day, teams, as well as pedestrians, almost filled every avenue leading to the center of the village. Mainly were the anathemas heaped upon the head of the murderer, and fearing that there might be violence shown him, the officer took him quietly to his house in Stratford." End quote. So basically, all these people came to view the body, which, that's wild to me.
We know how this...
I know. It's just, And they did a really good job of protecting Evans, I have to say. They really did go above and beyond to, Franklin's first trial began in Exeter, New Hampshire on February 3rd, 1873, and it lasted 3 days. About midway through, he had a really half-hearted suicide attempt in his cell, but he was prevented from succeeding, and a lot of people felt like Evans was trying to set the stage to prove an insanity defense. But it really took no time at all. I think it was like 45 minutes, and the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to hang. Yeah, there was no question. So Evans, now realizing he's done for, that he's going to hang, he starts confessing, and boy, does he have a lot to confess to. So I debated reading his full confession. I decided against it because it was really long, but also he victim blames and makes excuses about everything. And I didn't even want to put those words on the air because it's all just lies, right?
Sure, yeah.
And also the newspapers at the time apparently really, really heavily edited it, because I think what we would have been interested in was he apparently told exactly slice by slice what he had done to all of his victims and why he had done it. And that would have been of more interest, if that makes sense. Like, that might have given some insight into the mind of the killer, whereas reading the, "Oh, she came on to me," or, "Oh, they were asking," yeah. So I'm just going to tell you a little about it and the main bits. I'll share a link in our sources in case you do want to see what was printed in the papers. So in his written confession, he admits to killing Georgie, and he admits to another murder. He admits that in 1850, while he was living in Salem, Massachusetts, he traveled to Derry, New Hampshire, and kidnapped one of the 5-year-old Mills twins. And the reason he did this was so that he could kill her and use her body as his own medical cadaver, and then sell the skeleton. He says that he strangled her, but when he began to examine her body, he found that her hip and spine were somewhat deformed, and this apparently really just grossed him out, and so he buried her body.
Oh, that grossed him out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hate to say it, but I think when he says examine, he meant sexually, abusing the corpse. I think he, So he's going to examine her. So he instead buried her under a rotting chestnut tree. Like he lifted up a root ball, buried her, and then dropped it back down. And there was also rumors around the time in Lawrence, Massachusetts, where one of his children was living, that he had sold the skeleton of a child to a doctor. So who knows what's true?
Hey, that's all absolutely horrifying. And we do think, right, he could be responsible for even more murders. I mean, that's...
Absolutely, yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. You're thinking the same. Okay.
100%. Yes, definitely. Yeah. So, in addition to his written confession, he kept on blabbing to Sheriff Drew. He apparently said to the sheriff, he asked if anyone from Maine was looking for him. And Drew was like, well, where in Maine? Because Maine's a big state, got to narrow it down. And Evans said near Augusta that in 1861 or 1862, a girl around there had had her throat cut. And the sheriff was like, I'm not aware of anybody looking into you for any crimes in Maine. And Evans was like, oh. All right, never mind then. But the thing is, someone was looking at him for that crime, and that person was Mr. Pillsbury. You remember from last week, he defended Laurence Doyle in the murder case of Laura Libby, who...
Pro bono.
Pro bono, I believe, yep, for the murder of Laura Libby from Maine, who had her throat cut. And Pillsbury never thought that Doyle, who died in prison, was guilty. His belief was that Evans had murdered Laura. He claimed that her family were Seventh-day Adventists, and that is why they didn't go to church with Laura that day, and that Evans had been a guest at their house before it was found out he was a fraud, like he was a guest preacher. He also claimed that Evans knew details about the Libby murders that he didn't know. So apparently, Evans was telling the sheriff details and facts about Laura's killing that the sheriff didn't know, but I couldn't find any specifics on that, and it's frustrating. It's really impossible to know for sure if he was responsible for Laura's murder, but I think we can all agree that it's not only possible, it's probable. There's a real good chance. And then, of course, we can't forget the Joyce children, and Sheriff Drew also felt that it was likely Evans had murdered them too. He was in Roxbury, and he apparently had known more about the murders than the sheriff did again. He spent time in the woods looking for his plants. So he's in the area, he's woodsy, but like the bad kind of woodsy. And you meet the one witness member who had seen that man with wild dark hair in the woods that she thought looked kind of murdery. Well, Troy Taylor says, quote, Sheriff Drew traced Evans's movements to Rhode Island, then to Roxbury, Massachusetts, linking him to the Joyce murders. Evans admitted being in Roxbury and knew more about the case than Drew did. Evans, while plant collecting for herbalists, was constantly walking in the woods around Boston. He argued back and forth with Drew about the details of the case, eventually admitting to information about stab wounds and locations of the body that were unknown to anyone except the police, and the killer, of course. The reporter who investigated Evans's confessions managed to find a young Boston woman who had been visiting friends in Roxbury in June 1865. She was surprised in the woods by the appearance of a wild, haggard-looking man of horrible aspect. While the man came near her, she screamed at the very top of her voice. The reporter showed her a picture of Evans, along with several others, and even though it had been 7 years since the incident occurred, quote, she immediately, unhesitatingly identified it as the portrait of the man who had so frightened her, end quote. This was enough for investigators. Evans's pieces of information and a witness who placed him at the scene was enough for officials to accept that he had killed the Joyce siblings. Headlines were soon appearing around the country with the news that the murders had finally been solved. End quote. Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Here's the thing, though. Despite all the talking he had done with the sheriff about what he'd known, at the end, he only confessed to the 5-year-old Miller child and to Georgie's murder. He denied and recanted involvement with the murder of the Joyce children or of Laura Libby. And there were other murders mentioned as well, but they're so vague that I couldn't find what they were referring to. You know, the papers would say something like, he's also being looked into for a crime in New Hampshire 3 years previous. Yeah. And it's like, well, that's
But the authorities, too, thought he's responsible for way more murders, or he could be a suspect in way more murders.
Absolutely. There's no way that what he did to his grandniece, Georgie, you don't start out with doing
that's
that.
already very escalated.
Yeah. On Tuesday, February 17th, 1874, in front of an absolutely packed, excited, standing-room-only kind of crowd, Franklin Evans was hanged for the murder of his grandniece, and I'm happy to tell you it was not an easy death. His wishes were observed, though, and his body was donated to Dartmouth College Medical School. Dartmouth is an Ivy League university in New Hampshire. I've got a photo to share of his body on the dissecting table, and his skeleton is in the school's museum, so maybe we can take a field trip there sometime. Check out his nasty old bones. So, now, a very quick recap of the crimes from episodes 80 and 81. We talked about the Founty women, and then in July 1874, 20-year-old Marietta Ball is found beaten to death with a rock. She is raped, her body is posed, and she is discovered in St. Albans, Vermont. Then in October 1875, 17-year-old Josie Langmaid is murdered, raped, mutilated, and beheaded in Pembroke, New Hampshire. In March 1878, Joseph Lepage was hanged for his crimes. And those crimes were, it is widely believed, the murders of Josie Langmaid, Marietta Ball, and the two Founty women. But I kept thinking of those cases the whole time I was reading about these cases because just the similarities in the locations, the manner of death, and how often these killers will make false confessions or refuse to confess to things they definitely did.
All the time.
The time.
All the time. They want to be so mysterious or appear tougher than they are, or
saving face.
Oh my God, you didn't catch me with all the 555 women that are murdered, and all the time.
All the time.
Like, who was the one I always quote and I always forget his name, who confessed every single murder they put in front of him?
Yeah.
Henry Lee Lucas.
Yes, exactly. Henry Lee Lucas.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's always my biggest example for false confessions because he confessed to everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
just like to fuck with authorities and that's it.
Exactly. So that's what makes it so hard. And especially because obviously there's no forensics. We can't go back and take a look, and see what actual evidence was on these scenes. I'm sure they're probably just really similar cases in similar places happening around the same time. But there were, I guess, 2 serial killers that were into rape and mutilation executed 4 years apart at the same prison in Concord, New Hampshire.
I mean, obviously it couldn't have been Evans in the later crimes because he was already dead, right? But you're thinking it could be one serial killer responsible for all of the murders?
No.
Or kind of like a copy situation, because maybe, I guess, these kind of crimes were all over the media back then.
Yes. Yeah, a copy thing. Or how often were Lepage's crimes confused with, I don't know. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but for some reason, all the similarities and the same place and the relative same time frame, that's all New England and the part of Canada close to New England and just so close together. They were executed 4 years apart,
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. It's awful. So that's it.
I think that's one of the worst, horrible things that happened to kids that you ever covered.
I'm sorry. I know.
No,
it's awful. It's awful.
I never heard about it.
I didn't really
I know
either.
you mentioned the book several times, but I never knew what it was about.
It's funny because I'd heard a vague talk about the Bussey murders when I worked at the Arboretum, but I didn't know how bad they were. It's just really tragic, really disturbing stuff. I'm curious to hear what our listeners will think in the Facebook group, to talk about, because I know that there's probably no link to them in any way. It's just, I don't know why this one bothers me so much.
I'm kind of blanking right now. I don't even know something good. I mean, there's so much something good going on, but wow, that was just a hard episode. I mean, something good. My husband is home. We went for lunch yesterday with my family. It was super nice. He's starting to settle in. It's all good. It's all really good.
That's awesome. My something good is the Arnold Arboretum. It's not just like a really beautiful and historic green space in Boston. It's a living museum on 280 acres. It's amazing. They have trees, shrubs, plants from all over the world. They have an amazing bonsai collection. They have fantastic docents who lead tours regularly, and they also have self-guided tours, so you can go yourself and check out their website and go for a beautiful walk. They have amazing events like Lilac Sunday, which is the second Sunday in May, which is also Mother's Day, when you're allowed to come and picnic on the grounds. It's very, very popular there. There's also a gift shop. You know, I love a gift shop. And restrooms in the Honeywell building in the visitor center. So check their website for hours. Also, membership is a really big part of how they fund their educational programs and research that they do. So I urge you to check out their membership options. Some levels include you get a seedling in the mail every year as a benefit. I hope that's still the case. And it's amazing, the plants that you might receive. I'm actually going to up my membership and start getting my seedlings because we have a lot of planting to do here. My dad has, from when I used to work there, my dad has an Eastern Dawn redwood on his property and a really cool Japanese forsythia, which is beautiful, that both came from the Arboretum. I used to work there, and I love the people there so very much. And it's free, and it's open every day from sunrise to sunset. And you can take your dogs for a walk, keep them on a leash, and yeah, it's beautiful. Go check it out.
I want to see it.
Yeah.
I've only ever been to an arboretum once that was in Trsteno, near Dubrovnik, where they shot some of the scenes of Game of Thrones.
Nice.
Can highly recommend that one too.
Good.
If you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, please do us the huge favor and go to your podcast app, check if you can leave us a rating and or review. It really keeps us going. It also helps us, for other people who are interested in similar content to find us, to be suggested to them. And it really makes our day when we read your reviews. They are always very kind, very nice, very, very productive.
We really appreciate it. Yeah. What else? You can go to our webpage, freshhellpodcast.com, to find all sorts of information.
Yes.
In the Facebook group, I wanted to send a shout out to Sarah, who reminded me of Seneca Village. I briefly mentioned Central Park in passing last week when we were discussing Frederick Law Olmsted. And she brought up in the Facebook group the fascinating history that is Seneca Village, which was an area of free Black people and then later some Irish and I think even German who had lived in an area of Manhattan that was taken from them by public domain in order to build Central Park. It's a really fascinating and tragic story, so check that out if that history is interesting to you. Also, another shout out to Jean, who was so fun to talk maps with. Jean, I'm Jean the Map Queen. I'm going to message you in the future because I'm terrible at maps. But messaging with Jean in the Facebook group made me wonder, did someone get the location of Maze Woods wrong? Were they always going out that way and planning to take the streetcar rather than just walking a mile or so from Grandma's, you know? What else? Our email, don't forget to send us your spooky stories. Our email is freshhellpodcast@gmail.com. Shout out to Doug. Thank you so much for the really great case suggestions and info on library assistance. We appreciate it.
If you're interested in our Patreon, you can also find the link on our webpage, or you go to Patreon directly. Type in Fresh Hell Podcast, we pop right up. We have 3 tiers. We do game nights with one of the tiers. We read old-timey articles. We read one about the Nell Cropsey murder. We have a merch store. You also find the link on our webpage. We have some new designs there in our Teespring store. Just for Halloween, some spooky fuckery designs. Go have a look. See if there's anything you like.
That's right, because I think those are only going to be here for Halloween, right? And then they'll be disappearing.
Yes,
so.
Exactly. They're going to disappear afterwards. Exactly.
That's right.
Please tell your pets we said hi. We love them. We miss them. Hug them, cuddle them. Give them a boop on the nose. Treat them nicely. Take them to the vet. Keep them cold. Keep them warm. Whatever is.
Keep them wet. Keep them dry.
keep them
moist,
keep them dry.
as needed. It's
yes. Do everything you need to do for them. You're the only thing they've got. But be not only kind to your pets, be kind to your fellow human beings. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Everybody's stressed out once in a while.
That's right.
Also, be kind to yourself. It's the hardest thing of all. And that's it.
That's all. That is all. And until next week, please remember that if you are going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.